Part 1, The Prophetic Shadow over Southern Africa. Let's be clear from the start, what you're about to hear is highly speculative. This is not a claim, not a prediction, but an exploration of ideas where history, belief, and modern geopolitics seem to overlap in unusual ways. Take it seriously if you want, question it if you feel compelled, but most importantly, join the discussion in the comments, because this only works if it becomes a conversation. For more than a century, the name Sina van Rensburg has echoed through Afrikaner history. Some dismiss him outright, others study his visions closely, but almost everyone agrees on one thing: his imagery was vivid, unsettling, and strangely persistent. He spoke of dark clouds forming over southern Africa, not just literal storms, but something heavier, symbolic of unrest, confusion, and a breakdown of order. In many retellings, these clouds do not arrive suddenly, they build slowly, almost unnoticed, until the horizon is completely consumed, leaving little room for reversal. What makes those old visions interesting today is not just their existence, but how easily people can map them onto present conditions. Across parts of southern Africa, there are visible pressures, economic strain, infrastructure that struggles to keep up, communities that feel uncertain about the future. Political systems continue to function, but for many, they no longer feel like they are solving the deeper problems. There is a growing sense that the surface is being maintained while deeper fractures widen quietly underneath, often hidden behind official narratives. Over time, people begin to ask uncomfortable questions. What if the systems in place are not failing temporarily, but structurally? What if the solutions being offered are simply recycling the same outcomes, dressed in new language but producing the same results? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what if the tipping point is not a single event, but a gradual accumulation that suddenly becomes irreversible, catching society off guard? And then comes the more controversial idea, one that appears in certain interpretations of old prophecy. The suggestion that, during a period of internal crisis, help does not emerge from within the country, but from outside it. Not as conquest, not as colonization, but as a kind of intervention that stabilizes what can no longer stabilize itself. This idea is often dismissed, yet it continues to resurface, especially in times when internal solutions seem increasingly out of reach and confidence in institutions declines. If that idea were to be taken seriously, even hypothetically, then this foreign helper would need to meet very specific conditions. It wouldn't just be any country with goodwill. It would need capability, intent, and the willingness to act where others hesitate. It would need to have a reason to care, whether strategic, economic, or historical. And suddenly, the field of possibilities becomes very narrow. Because in the modern world, there are not many powers that fit that description. And that narrowing is where speculation begins to feel less like imagination, and more like pattern recognition driven by observable global behavior. Part 2, Germany's return to power, coincidence or convergence? Now we move from prophecy into something more concrete, still speculative, but grounded in observable shifts. In recent years, Germany has undergone a transformation that would have seemed unlikely just a decade ago. For decades after World War II, Germany maintained a cautious military posture, shaped by history and restraint. But that posture has changed. Defense budgets have expanded, military readiness has increased, and the tone of German policy has shifted toward a more active role in global security. What was once politically sensitive is now increasingly normalized in public discourse. This change didn't happen in isolation. The world itself has become more unstable, and Europe has been forced to reconsider its position in that instability. Yet among European nations, Germany stands apart, not just because of its economic strength, but because of its ability to convert that strength into real logistical and military capability. It has the industrial depth to sustain operations, not just initiate them, which is a critical difference in prolonged engagements. It is one thing to have political influence. It is another to move equipment, coordinate operations, and sustain a presence far from home. Germany can do that. And more importantly, it can do it with efficiency that few others can match. Its systems are designed for integration, not improvisation, reducing the margin for error in high-pressure environments. And this is where speculation begins to connect dots that may or may not belong together. If there were ever a scenario where a foreign stabilizing force became necessary in a region like Southern Africa, it would require precision, discipline, and long-term commitment. It would not be a symbolic presence. It would need to function effectively in complex and unpredictable conditions, where missteps could have lasting consequences not just locally, but internationally. Germany, at least on paper, fits that role more closely than most. It has the capability, the structure, and increasingly, the political mindset to consider involvement beyond its immediate borders. Its strategic culture is evolving, and that evolution is being watched closely by analysts around the world. There is also a historical layer, uncomfortable, complicated, but real. Germany once had a presence in Southern Africa, particularly in Namibia. That history is not something to romanticize, but it does create a thread, however thin, connecting past and present in a way that cannot be completely ignored when discussing long-term geopolitical patterns. So the question begins to form, not as a statement but as a possibility. Is Germany simply preparing to defend Europe? Or is it quietly positioning itself for a broader role in a world that is becoming increasingly unstable? And if the second possibility holds even a fraction of truth, could regions like Southern Africa one day enter that equation, not by design, but by circumstance shaped by unfolding crises? Part 3. The tactical reality, when theory meets ground conditions. Speculation can only go so far before it runs into reality. And reality is often less romantic, more technical, and far more demanding. If we imagine, even hypothetically, a situation where a region within Southern Africa attempts to establish stability under extreme conditions, the scale of what would be required becomes immediately clear. This is not about small groups or isolated efforts. Modern security is complex. It relies on systems, coordination, and technology that most local actors simply do not have access to. The gap between what is needed and what is available is not small, it is enormous, and often underestimated in casual discussions. Surveillance alone has become a highly advanced field, involving drones, data analysis, and real-time coordination. Mobility requires more than vehicles, it requires logistics networks that can sustain operations over time. Communication must be secure, fast, and resilient against disruption. And perhaps most critically, command structures must be unified and disciplined, able to respond quickly without fragmentation or internal conflict. Without these elements, even the most determined efforts tend to collapse under pressure. History has shown this repeatedly, in different regions and under different circumstances. Determination alone cannot compensate for structural disadvantage, especially in prolonged situations where resources are continuously strained. This is why the idea of external support, controversial as it is, keeps resurfacing in discussions like this. Not because it is ideal, but because it may be the only way to bridge the gap between intention and capability. It introduces a level of control and coordination that is otherwise impossible to achieve under chaotic conditions, particularly when time is a critical factor. And once again, Germany appears in the frame, not as a certainty, but as a possibility. German military systems are known for precision, integration, and efficiency. Their approach is not based on overwhelming force alone, but on coordination and control. In a scenario where stability needs to be established quickly and maintained consistently, those qualities matter more than sheer numbers. It is not about dominating space, it is about controlling outcomes in a predictable and sustainable way. In contrast, many regional forces, whether official or informal, operate under significant limitations. Equipment is often outdated, supply chains are inconsistent, and command structures can be fragmented. This creates an imbalance so severe that any advanced external force would immediately shift the dynamics on the ground. But even if such an intervention were possible, it would raise an even bigger question, one that cannot be ignored. What happens after stability is achieved? And who ensures that stability lasts beyond the initial phase? Part 4. Restoration, Economics, and the Final Alignment. Because in the end, no amount of military strength can build a lasting society on its own. Stability achieved through force must eventually transition into stability sustained by systems, institutions, and economic activity that can endure beyond any external presence. If we follow this speculative path to its conclusion, the role of an external force would have to be temporary, or at least transitional. Its purpose would not be to control, but to create space where systems can be rebuilt, where governance can take shape, and where economic activity can return to something sustainable. Without that transition, any gains would be temporary at best and likely to unravel under renewed pressure. This is where Germany's role, if it were ever to exist in such a scenario, would extend beyond the military. Germany is not just a military power. It is an economic engine with the ability to invest, to build, and to connect regions through trade and infrastructure. In a fragile environment, those capabilities could make the difference between short-term stability and long-term recovery. Infrastructure, in particular, becomes the backbone of any restoration effort. Energy, transport, communication, and water systems all play a role in stabilizing daily life and restoring confidence. The idea, in purely theoretical terms, is that security creates a window. And within that window, institutions can be restored, communities can reorganize, and a new equilibrium can begin to form. It is not an instant transformation, but a gradual process that depends on consistency, leadership, and coordination across multiple levels of society. For those who view this through a prophetic lens, this stage is often seen as the moment where physical reality aligns with something deeper, where long-standing expectations, even spiritual ones, seem to find fulfillment in real-world events. Whether one believes that or not, it adds another layer to the narrative that continues to draw attention. But it is important to return, once again, to the grounding truth. This is speculation. It is a narrative constructed from patterns, interpretations, and possibilities. It may resonate with some, and feel completely implausible to others. And that tension is exactly what makes it worth discussing, rather than dismissing outright. So now it turns to you. Do you see coincidence in these global shifts, or something that feels more connected? Do you believe external intervention is ever a realistic path, or is it a dangerous illusion? And where, if anywhere, do you think Southern Africa fits into the future that is slowly unfolding? Take this into the comments. Push back. Add your perspective. Because if there is any truth to be found in speculation, it is usually uncovered not in silence, but in discussion.